everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It is my pleasure to introduce Jimi Washburn. My little tagline for Jimi is persistence. So and that definitely goes with the topic Jimmy's going to be talking about today, the challenges of starting a disciplined agile transformation. I had the pleasure of first meeting Jimi, a little over a year and a half ago at a Disciplined Agile unconference, and there was a lot of discussion that came about with respect to organizational transformations and things like governance and how they related to discipline agile. And it's been an interesting year and a half as Jimi has been extremely persistent and very diligent in trying to get a DA transformation going. And with that, Jimi, what I'd like to ask you to do is just introduce yourself and give a little bit of context of where you're at and what you've been doing.
Sure. So name's already out there. And I've had the privilege of leading a function called delivery management in our organization for a little over 3 years. Prior to that, I was really leading the technology and security portfolio for our CTO. Very small team, myself and one direct report. So kind of fulfilling an important need for portfolio selection, prioritization, and execution. But I can remember, and we were a smaller group at the time. We're in a high growth environment, the pre-IPO environment. And I can recall sitting down with the heads of technology and security departments. And, we've been working together for a number of years and seeing where we needed to go. We just knew that some of our practices we're going to need to improve. We're going to need to get ahead. And I recall sitting around, how do we scale? It was a question of scaling. How do we scale some agile practices? How do we put agile practices where we don't have them? And I had a little bit of exposure to scaled frameworks, but no offense to anyone, I was a little pessimistic. And I also was seeing the governance requirements that would be coming in our future. And I was a little fearful as well. No offense again, but I was afraid we were going to get these governance strategies that were just not going to enable the kind of execution and speed we wanted. So we sat around, we did a little bit of research, and I remembered a corner of the Agile internet. There was this book out there, and so we ordered a couple of dozen of them, and we're like, all right, it's a light experiment. Does it make sense or does it not? And I can recall that was an aha moment for myself and some of my peers when we realized, hey, there's really something to lean into here for Disciplined Agile. So that was the genesis. That's how we kind of identified this would be a great toolkit for us. And then we conducted a number of experiments over the years and put some of the practices to good work, which we can talk about specifically around the governance area, as well as team of teams approaches as we scaled. And then, of course, the experience where I met you was we started to reach a point where we wanted to carry this out to the enterprise. And my purview expanded beyond just technology and security. As was mentioned, I now have an enterprise focus. And so as a result of that, we've been looking for, in our context, the best way, the right way to start making inroads in the absence of one of these like wholesale transformations. So over the last year and a half, we've probably done 8 to 10 different experiments. Some not so good, some excellent. But we have, we're still at that point where we have not made a deliberate, focused investment. So we're a little bit in between grassroots and organizational directive at this time.
Yeah. And so the bit of interaction we've had over the time period, and I know that governance, especially being in a regulated environment, was something that was very important to both your current state and the future. So what were some of the things from a governance perspective that you found within DA? Because that's also, I mean, most PMOs, most individuals that are trying to bring a new way of working in, whether it's DA or any of the other agile approaches, right? We have different strategies that we see as far as what might be the catalyst for that. I know that there's some other strategies I'm going to also ask you about, but governance to begin with.
Yeah, so I think I'm really grateful. I had some partners, really forward-thinking and like-minded partners in parts of our organization: risk management, audit, security, governance. And so, what we did is we just said, well, what are the risks that we care the most about? We'd seen the old models, right, that were very cumbersome and paperwork intensive and milestones, and we
Evidence,
needed to find.
yeah.
There was expectations for us to do some of that, but what we really latched onto were three key things that were just to me magic in the toolkit. Number one was the definition of roles, because we realized that's where a lot of risk can exist in the absence of some prescriptive definition of the roles.
Mhm.
And the three primary roles, every team really helped unlock or empower some of that governance for us, and giving the right approvals to the right people. And the second was the milestones. What we saw was, we have teams in varied states of formation. We were high growth, pre-IPO. We're developing new functions, and so some teams have been running for years, and they had a really stable way of working. And then we had others that were brand new, or were hiring to put to work. And so, how do you put a governance strategy in place that spans those contexts? And the lightweight milestones and life cycles, those were the last two, milestones and life cycles, really helped us have a language where we could allow people to kind of, again, choose your way of working and do it in a disciplined way, so that those who govern us were like, okay, I can understand, it's defined, and we see what your strategy is.
Yeah, excellent. How has using some of this new approach in governance worked out for you?
Well, with all new endeavors, at least in the context you're in, you learn things. And so, one of the things I'll tell you, one of the aha moments is folks realize, wait a minute, I'm playing three roles, but I'm one person, because, I'm the architecture owner, maybe the product owner, and the team lead helping to deliver, which was great because that started surfacing risk. Okay, we've got one person who's got a number of contexts, and maybe that's okay for the team they're on. Maybe that's an indication we need to think about scaling that team. Um, I will say, when we had, so how's it worked out? We actually shared some of the work at the unconference and even carried it to some external parties and kind of got their input. And what I think was most remarkable is that there was a fear that these strategies would not work in a regulated environment.
Mhm.
Um, and in fact, the opposite was true. They were kind of applauded way. You're thinking more holistically, more long-term, more broadly. This should serve you well as the organization grows. And so what has not worked so well? I mean, there's times when there are people that, we expect that's your responsibility. And let's help you meet that responsibility if you're not, but it does put some definition where there wasn't before. And of course, with that comes accountability and the training and development to help people meet their accountabilities.
Yeah. And we've got a question from Barbie on this that she asks, did you have any regulated compliance challenges with teams using different life cycles?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. And
yet.
I
Sorry,
was
go
just
ahead, Josh.
chime in is that's one of the great things that, having these lightweight milestones and the underlying governance of both the agile and the lean life cycle are the same. Right. So, I mean, they look for just very specific things that we want to see teams doing, and how they meet them and what it's going to take to meet them. Obviously, is going to be different for potentially each team, and then each team's next content of work. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things that lightweight approach provides.
Yeah, I have found it as helpful because it's got people thinking in a similar vein, despite the method of delivery. So a lot of the larger, higher risk programs, we have a program team of teams model, um, and and that's where things can fall apart because you have what happens to the governance and the sub teams,
Yeah.
and so we've been really grateful that up to this point we've taken a kind of a holistic, broad approach. And we're doing it for our highest risk initiatives, which is also curious, not our lowest risk initiatives.
Right.
Um, but that's actually where you want to apply it and test it out. So as we've seen some good results, there's two things. We are looking for ways to expand it to areas where the risk profile may be different, that the organization wants to manage, um, less so regulatory perhaps, and maybe other avenues of risk management, but also how to lighten it. Because one of the other things I really like about it is as the muscle and the discipline gets built, those little, I like to use the metaphor that your definition of done, which includes the governance milestones, they turn from checklists to bullet points, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just ingrained in the way of working. So we no longer need to, we no longer need to see them check the box. It's such a stable part of their way of working. It's just documented and people can inspect it if they like, but we don't need to audit it per se.
Yeah. Excellent. So I know that governance was one of the things that was an initial, focal point for you. But what are some of the other strategies that you have used? You said right now you're kind of in between grassroots and maybe getting closer to a tipping point with your leadership, senior leadership, to maybe move a bit more into this.
Yeah, I think, I've been trying to think about the right way to characterize this. If I were to think like one challenge of an agile transformation would be somebody tries to buy it. They're going to like throw a bunch of money at a problem, bring a bunch of
Right.
coaches in and take this big bang approach, which that's not our
Rarely works.
culture. And it's also not a success pattern.
Yeah.
The other challenge is if nobody wants to buy it. Right. So what do you do in that environment? And thankfully, we don't have that. I think we're in a different context. Our culture is, as I mentioned, high growth, and we're continuing to grow and build teams. So we often have to choose between adding people and investing in people. Right. That's a good paradigm to be in. And as you do that, what is the right balance? Right. What is the right balance? And so, I think discrete training has often been one of the challenges. Like, where do we and when do we apply that? And how do we apply that? And, can we take people out of play for 4 days or 2 days? Is that really going to be healthy, or is there something we can do that's incremental? And so one of the things that we did to test, and also where is this just the purview of technology, or can we take it over to contracts management or internal audit or other areas of the
Yeah.
business? And so we had a hypothesis that can apply where it's most ripe, right? We needed to look for the places in the organization. And if I can share one other experiment that we did last year, since we were in an environment that was going to be really challenging, and we didn't want people to lose a lot of momentum nor take on so much they couldn't apply it all, we experimented with a small class internally. We took a cohort from across the business, some very vocal people who we knew we could get rich feedback from, and we took an hour and a half at a time every other week. And we brought one of the DA principles and how we could maybe tailor that principle to practices, and gave people a chance to put it to work. No, a lot of learning from that, and some were in a better environment to put it to work than others. But it did give us rich feedback in so much as, is this viable? Is this viable? Do we want to continue the investment? Do we want to pivot? Do we want to cancel it? And so getting to your earlier comment, what is leadership and others feedback? When we see those things, we'll continue to see that proven viability of the toolkit for us.
And as you started to have more and more interactions with people across your organization, obviously you said high growth organization. So, I mean, you've continued to expand and expand. Were you challenged by anybody that might have had experience with other approaches and saying, well, I use this at this organization, it works great. Why wouldn't we maybe just do this on my team?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Like, you want to go agile, right? And then all of a sudden, there's tons of advocates, but your strongest advocates are also your strongest opponents sometimes, because we're thinking this way and
Yeah,
you're thinking that way.
right.
So I got another book, and I started
Oh,
circulating.
Jimmy's got all the books.
Yeah. So, and this is not, I'm sharing my journey, certainly not part of the publishing mechanism. And I know they're updated. Mine have gone electronic, so I've got the older ones. But, I had a good partner who was really, let's scale Scrum. And another one actually kind of had a different perspective. There was a group clamoring for another model, which was very anti-scaling and relatively insistent. Let's bring some consultants in. And it was one of those kind of like closed door trainings, like couldn't even bring the head of delivery into the training per se. They wanted to protect the team. So we let those experiments occur too,
Yeah.
because it's important to gather the information and the data. And, so I think what's happened is I've shared with a lot of people, I index on pragmatism, and had an early career in emergency services. And that's an environment where you get theory and training, right? Here's a lot of theory, but then immediately they say, let me tell you which parts of this will never apply. And in practice, this is what you really need to care about. And that little that voice in the back of my head of pragmatism has always been there. And so to your comment about, others, that's been a nice thing. Let's just be practical. Let's take small experiments and prove or disprove our hypotheses and amplify the ones that work. So, it's early on. I think the other challenge I had early on was credibility. Wait a minute, there's this framework that's massive and looks like it got a massive footprint and tons of consultants. And there's these others that don't cost a lot of money. We can do a day of training. We get people on board. And we don't know much about this disciplined agile thing.
Yeah.
Credibility was a challenge early on. I think a recent acquisition has removed that barrier for most of us these days.
Yeah.
And no doubt that's unlocking a lot of the interest as we move forward. But early on, there was some of that, and I can just say that collaborating and partnering and testing helps prove out which option is best for the context you're in.
Gotcha. So Rolando asks a question that actually I was planning to ask something very similar. So his question is very timely. Being in a growth model, how did your hiring practices change, or did they, with your desire to move towards DA?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rolando. Actually, there was a nugget of wisdom early on. And we're based on the West Coast, and you get a lot of familiarity with, even if they don't use expressions, the same language of lean and agile, right? There's a little bit of a pervasive mentality. It's real easy to kind of find, especially in product development, engineering, and those functions, people who are conversant with those capabilities. Mm-hmm. But in contrast, and again, no offense, we were finding that some roles, some job descriptions weren't getting the traction that we wanted to see, whether they're traditional project or program managers, or in fact, even some scrum master roles, people who were not necessarily succeeding. So we took a step back and retooled our definitions of the work. So we really appreciate this definition of delivery manager as more of like an senior agile program manager, a person who's able to work within a team and maybe coach, versus perhaps need to actually be the team lead for a large program. That was a difficult skill set to staff for, but like I mentioned, that was something we recognized as an early need. And so we rewrote job descriptions and staffing within the delivery organization, which was formerly like an EPMO type of environment. So we kind of sit in this hybrid model between an EPMO and an Agile Center of Excellence, and we're growing as well. We're still trying to build it out. So we figured that was important because, number one, we needed the right examples. People needed to see something that they could relate to and say, yeah, that looks good. Yeah. The second thing that we did was we partnered really closely with our HR team, and that's an ongoing partnership. And they were early advocates. I mentioned that class. That was actually co-sponsored by our head of people and culture, and one of my peers that is leading a function in people and culture as well. So those partnerships, we realize this is a journey, and kind of having them on early and continuing to grow them will influence our hiring practices. So we feel like we're going to increase the probability of we're getting the right kind of thinking, the right mindsets as we continue to open up and grow new functions and new roles in the organization.
Cool. You'd mentioned that you were looking to use an agile way of working in whatever area of your organization it would be a good fit for. Outside of just sort of the more traditional IT area, have you started to use either an agile way of working or to be using agile practices in any of the other areas?
Yeah, we have. And it's interesting, who I mentioned earlier, this concept of where it's ripe. Some places you don't want to experiment. We've got a team, a high performing team, been working together, virtually most of them, for 6, 7, 8 years, Right. You want to go tinker with that? I mean, they can, give them information, they can select their own experiments and kind of know how they could optimize, or when something changes. On the other hand, though, in a high growth environment, or when you're, in a startup type culture, or, even just looking to implement better ways of working, there are those teams that may be highly constrained, right? Or they experience just an untenable amount of volatility in the way that they're working. Those are ripe areas. And we had a couple within the organization. I won't call them by name, but these are business functions, business operations functions. They may overlap with, legal and audit and other things of this nature. And just the simplest techniques, which, are not germane to Disciplined Agile. They've been around for the longest time. But as an example, introducing definitions of ready and definition of done, so they can manage their batches a little better. Boy, that's like candy. People love that. They love that. And so, but that's not a novel concept. But the pragmatism in the toolkit says, okay, as we look down, where do you need to take an improvement? That seems to be a place you'll get a ton of leverage, right? Versus maybe estimations, things of that nature. That may be something that people are like, how do I create greater predictability? When
Yeah.
really that's not the challenge that we're dealing with. It's not about the predictability, it's the readiness of your batch. So that's been one thing that I think I've been really pleased to see. In a similar vein, how it teasing back out the milestones, where does it fit in the life cycle?
Yeah.
It helps them connect between here's the piecework I need to do and the big picture that we're in, and again, kind of enabling an overall governance strategy for the organization.
Yeah, and we've got a question from Vicky, which I'm going to actually take, so I'll be able to answer this maybe kind of quickly that ties into that. She's asking if there's some examples of lightweight milestones for teams and leadership. And Vicky, what we have in Disciplined Agile and the multiple life cycles for both the lean and the agile one, there are 3 phases, and then there are lightweight milestones associated with that. And the first phase being inception, right, we're doing some upfront planning and enough work to make sure that we're able to get agreement on what we're going to do. We've got a good plan to move forward with it, and it's something we should move forward with. And so that's the stakeholder vision, our shared vision. Another example is we've got a milestone we get into the next phase, construction, called proven architecture, right? So we're taking a risk value approach to how the work should be sequenced, right? The prioritization of our backlog or our work items list or work items pool. And we want to make sure that we've got a really good foundation and we've mitigated whatever technical risk we might have by achieving that initial milestone in construction. And then there's some others that I won't go into this because there's plenty of other content out there for it. But yes, those are just some examples of those lightweight milestones that, again, depending on how a team might achieve those and what we would see from that is definitely going to vary. And Jimmy, we have another question from Claudia, and Claudia is asking, you'd mentioned that you can't just, or you shouldn't outright purchase your agile approach, right? As far as, your yes, we're now agile, we wrote a check for it, see? But basically she's saying, it has the financial commitment of the organization because it obviously isn't expensive to move to a new way of working, let alone something like an agile one. Has that been one of your impediments?
At times. So now I'll give an example. We thought 2020, yay, this is going to be the year, right? Because we've been tilling the soil.
Right.
We've been tilling the soil, working with one of our experiments. So that's a great question. And financial commitment looks a lot different to a lot of different organizations.
Yes.
One of our investments was to take a group of leaders to the unconference, and we had 2 or 3 learning objectives for it. Taking leaders out of play for a couple of days is not always easy to do, especially the folks that you worry should they all even be on the same plane, that kind of thing. But it was one of those investments that we agreed to because we wanted the insight and what we learned from that, which
Yeah.
in fact gave us the feedback we needed on whether we want to adopt these governance strategies. Other investments like maybe dedicated training or dedicated coaching, those look a little bit different. And so getting to where we are in 2020, this was the year if global pandemic hadn't showed up, we probably would have taken a lot of those steps. But
Yeah.
we looked around and said, okay, where is it needed? How can we pivot those investments or those experiments that we had planned and do something different? And it's kind of interesting. You mentioned life cycles. In the background, the lean exploratory life cycle is a little bit how we have taken our adoption approach to Disciplined Agile.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've
You
used the
have it right.
expression a series of experiments several times, but it's always deliberate. And so and all money's valuable and all time is valuable, if when there are constrained resources. So how do you right size those and get the learning back so that you can, know whether, again, to amplify it or to cancel and do something different?
Right.
So, I think that's a great question. And I would still encourage organizations, to be really careful. It's trivial sometimes to send, 2, 3, 4 dozen people a month, to get a certification per se. But if you really if you wanted to do something different, you wanted a couple of business teams to pivot their way of working to be a little more lean and a little faster. that's a different kind of investment. Which one's more valuable to the organization? So, I think there's a balance, and we certainly are not, we're at the inception stage still of our journey. We're definitely looking when is the right time and where's the right place to put some dedicated, more formal, but by the same token, it has been a, kind of an ongoing, as Joshua said, persistent pattern of testing and learning, and then hopefully, as we've seen, benefit come on the other side of it.
Yeah, and I guess since going back to where you had, a certain number of your senior leadership team that, came to a conference, began to raise their awareness of what DA was and what types of value it may or may not provide to the organization. That's definitely something that was a little bit ago. I would imagine by now your leadership team also kind of understands, which not all organizations do, as far as what it means to actually move forward with the transformation. Even if you're still starting kind of small, or you're going to be able to take it as much as you can hopefully do at any point in time. But good awareness of there's a lot that goes into to this.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the characterization of any other transformation, whether you're trying, we've used the language, we're in financial services, so a transformation of financial health. Someone wants to get on to a different journey of, how they manage, their finances or their physical health. So you want to start making big changes in your physical health. You've been healthy, you've been an athlete, but you need to, maybe you want to do something different. Uh, you know, that stick-to-itiveness, that persistence is one of the most important characteristics.
Yes.
That, and there's going to be things that, I thought a few things would have been slam dunks for us, just the easiest thing in the world. As an example, we're going to put a roadmap together, right? Roadmaps are great. We all love roadmaps. Wow, we'll talk about something challenging. so, so actually, we don't need roadmaps. We need experiments. We need to explore so we can understand how best in our context we can make progress.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the awareness is increasing, Joshua. To your point, it's interesting. It's become ubiquitous within some teams, and we're seeing areas where language, that shared language is becoming a thing now, which is really helpful. Most organizations, as they've gotten large, I know we used to be small. We're in a place now where we're starting to see, like, what does that acronym stand for, or what are you talking about? Shared language is really empowering.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I'm grateful that, independent of, maybe a formal engagement and formal things that people think about. Centers of excellence, tech talks. We've done tech talks internally and things of this nature, and we've advocated for forums in the community as people get embedded with it, and especially now that PMI is involved. It really does help create that groundswell.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Jimmy, as usual, the time it passes so quickly. And let me pull up a few closing slides while we wrap up today. And let's see here. Yeah, just a bit on if you, so as a sponsor of this webinar, if you have any need for, training, assessments, coaching, organizational transformation stuff with respect to DA, please come take a look at us, Process Mentors at processmentors.com. And I've mentioned this a few times now. We're really happy to see a lot of growth in this community forum. So we've got all things Disciplined Agile. And, there's just an example of some of the subforums. We've got a general Disciplined Agile discussion, certification exam prep. We've got lots of forums, and we're seeing, I need to update the slide since we've got a lot more topics and posts since, the first day that we put this live. But if you go to allthingsda.com, it's absolutely free. We've got a number of DA partners that have helped to create this community and set it up and are help moderating. We also have an area that maybe, since we know Jimmy's organization has some open job recs, maybe Jimmy will be posting in the area of it that's talent wanted. So if you're in the market and you've got some of what Jimmy's organization is looking for, somebody that does, we're hoping to be able to also have a forum for those types of opportunities as well. And we've got some, there's DA's got new certifications. We've been delivering the new Disciplined Agile Scrum Master training, and the Disciplined Agile Senior Scrum Master training is targeted to be released in December. We have our first delivery towards the end of January. Obviously, we're getting right into the holiday season. And we're also very excited that we are delivering our Agile and Lean Boot Camp. And we're trying to do that in a combination right before the Disciplined Agile Scrum Master training. The boot camp is something that we've used with a lot of organizations that we help go through, a transformation to DA, and we're now able to kind of combine it from a timing perspective out in the open enrollment perspective. And lastly, our next webinar, which will be December 2nd, we won't be on next week due to the holiday here in North America, but we'll have Karen Lewis. So as part of our, starting a transformation, working on getting a transformation going, and then looking at an agile transformation at scale, Karen Lewis is going to be talking about challenges and opportunities at Franklin Templeton Investments, very large scale, very successful adoption of Disciplined Agile. And then we will have both Jimi, Karen, and Anitra back in the last webinar that we will do for 2020, which will be an Ask Me Anything, where all the attendees get to drive the topics through their questions. And on that, Jimi, I would just like to thank you once again for coming and sharing, and really appreciate what you've been able to put out there as a learning experience. And just, again, it's a pleasure to be able to say just how persistent you've been.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Joshua. Thanks for all the great questions today.
Great. And thank you all for attending live, and for any of you those that might be watching this on recording. Good luck with your Agile way of working endeavors. We'll see you next time.